Information about the world of running, inspiration to fuel passion and excellence, and ideas for making connections and finding community. You're listening to AtoZrunning. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the AtoZrunning podcast, where we help runners thrive. I'm Andy.
And I am Zach. And physical therapist Betsy Petry-Johnson joins us today to discuss gluteal function and the importance of the glutes in the kinetic chain. So we've talked about dumb butt in the past. Now we're going to make it smart. And she's got tips, suggestions, insights, all the good stuff you need for using glutes well in a thorough examination. So you're going to want to listen to that, but also stick around afterward because we've got the latest from the world of running, including the Boston Marathon.
Woohoo!
Yes, and a world best relay and the Seoul Marathon, where some fast times were going on. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be excellent, and it's going to be informative, but not nearly as informative as it would be if you were also a subscriber. So go to AtoZrunning.com and click the word follow. Firstly, because it's free, and secondly, because it is just that easy.
And it's helpful.
Thirdly, because it's helpful.
Like Zach alluded to, we briefly mentioned answering a question from podcast listener Chrissy on our Q&A episode about racing shoes, drills, and dumb butt. Her question inspired us to reach out to our guest today, Betsy Petry-Johnson, to talk about glutes in further detail. So we love this kind of question because it helps us dive deeper into greater understanding of our bodies to help us thrive as runners. So this is a really educational episode. We appreciate your interaction and questions as always. And like they say in school, if you're thinking it, if you're questioning it, likely hundreds of others are also having that same question too. So please reach out and ask these questions.
That's not what I used to say when I was a teacher.
No, what did you say, Zach?
I would say, if you're thinking it, keep it in your head, because no one else wants to know it.
That is totally anti-educational.
Probably was talking about a different kind of issue than what you're discussing right now.
Okay. Well, you did work with teenagers, so who knows?
Yep.
Since we're talking about glutes today and how they respond, we thought we would shout out to ProTech Athletics because they make a lot of great products and I'm an ambassador for them. And so I get a discount. So I thought I'd share that all with you. It's AtoZ20. That's AtoZ20 for 20% off. And they have things like balls. We talk about how you need to squeeze those to activate for some of us. And some of us use a band to activate our glutes and get them stimulated. So I just wanted to mention ProTech Athletics. I will put that at AtoZrunning.com and you can get that disc code AtoZ20 for 20% off.
Excellent. Well, with that, let's go ahead and get practical with our main topic. Let's get started.
Today's main topic is what runners need to know about glutes. As Betsy and I discussed in this episode, it is easy to not use your muscles properly, and they're all connected. And as runners, we want to get the most out of our bodies. And if our gluteus maximus in particular, the largest muscle in our body, isn't firing correctly, we're going to have problems and we're missing out on its potential power. So today with Betsy, we're going to dive into the glute function, what muscles make up the gluteus complex, and then we're going to talk about how we know if it's firing and where its place is in the kinetic chain and how important it is for our muscles to work together. A little about our guest, Betsy Petry-Johnson. She is a physical therapist and orthopedic clinical specialist who has certifications in postpartum corrective exercises, certifications in functional movement system, and functional manual therapy. She's a triplet mom who has founded and developed Mama Made Strong, a postpartum recovery program. Today, we interviewed Betsy about glutes and their importance. You don't want to miss this chance to learn more about your body and the gluteus complex function. Let's talk to Betsy. Hi, Betsy. Welcome to the AtoZrunning podcast.
Hey, Andy. How are you?
Oh, we're doing good here. Enjoying spring. I know you guys are too, right?
Yes. There's so much pollen.
Yeah, you get one season of like snow and cold, and then you get the next one where you're sneezing and feel your sinuses for a couple months too.
You want to be outside so bad for the vitamin D and that sunshine, and then you're like, oh gosh, I got to go back in.
If it's not one thing, it's another. But
Yep.
I am excited for the turn of seasons, and a lot of our audience, we're ramping up training, looking at some marathons here in the spring and then summertime and then into the fall where it's main marathon season. So really all the time is running season, right?
Yeah.
But I know we all want to do it properly, and we want to do it in a way that can help us sustain our health. And that's why I wanted to talk to you, Betsy, here in the show today about glutes and kind of demystify glutes. Do you think it's possible to demystify glutes?
Yeah, I think it is. I do.
Yeah.
I think it takes some thinking about and some effort, but yeah, I mean, I think that there's such it's such an important muscle group. And I think that it has such far reaching effects that when you stop to think about it, it's almost like you can't unthink it once you start. Like it just it changes so many things. So yeah.
So let's jump right in, because our audience loves to learn what is the gluteus complex? Like what all is in that glute category?
So really there's 3 glutes. There's gluteus maximus, the one that you actually think of as your butt. That's the one that makes like the peach shape, and that like if you have your hand on your own butt or someone else's, like that's what you're feeling is is gluteus maximus, or like I like to say glute max because it's just too many syllables otherwise. And then gluteus medius or glute med is obviously the middle sized one. It's also the middle layer. So it's not the most superficial. It's not the most deep. It's the one in between. And then gluteus minimus is the deepest one and the smallest one that's further inside your body. You're not going to touch anybody's glute min, and like, to be honest, like it doesn't, all of your muscles are important, but like we don't spend as much time thinking about our training glute min as we do like glute med or glute max, and different people might need different emphasis on glute med versus glute max, but glute max is the biggest muscle in the human body. So if it's not working for you, you're going to have a problem somewhere.
And especially runners, right?
Yes. I run when I enjoy it kind of person. I have run a marathon. I have run triathlons, and I am feast or famine. Like sometimes I just can't get enough, and other times like I just don't want to go, and so like I'm kind of like back and forth, but I feel like that has been the biggest thing for my own running, is to really get a hold of using my glute max when I'm running. And it changes it from pushing with your calves or pulling with the front of your hips to pushing with this big, powerful muscle and the connection to the rest of your core. And like just the other week I came back from running and my husband was like, "Oh, how was your run?" And I was like, "I think that was the best run of my whole life." And he was like, "Are you serious?" And I was like, "Yeah, I mean, it wasn't amazingly far. It wasn't amazingly fast. It just felt good. Like it just felt efficient." And that's what I have really struggled with. I think honestly, I struggled most of my life, but it was having kids that really revealed to me what I was struggling with. And that learning to turn my glute max on just changed my running entirely. And it made it so much more fun and so much less painful,
Isn't that what we all want? More fun,
Yes.
less painful, more efficient.
Yes.
We feel like things are coming together. I think we all want this. I think we've convinced our entire audience to keep listening, because we all want to be working that way and to feel that way. So you spoke a little bit about what you would be doing if you weren't using your glute. How about what is your glute doing for you in those different parts of your glutes?
Okay, so let's start with glute max. So like if this is a person and they're facing that way, then your glute max can pull your foot back relative to your hip, or your knee backward relative to your hip, away from your face. But if your foot is, that's what happens if your foot is free floating, if it's not on the ground. If your foot is on the ground, that same contraction is pushing your hips forward over your foot, which we all know is what has to happen for you to walk or run, is that your hip has to pass your foot repeatedly. And so if your glute max isn't doing that, isn't pushing you forward over your foot, then either your hamstrings are pushing you forward over your foot, which might be a reason why you have chronically tight hamstrings no matter how much you stretch, or your calves are pushing you forward over your foot, which might be a reason why you have chronically tight calves no matter how much you stretch. And it can also be a factor in things like heel pain and plantar fasciitis, which are related to that whole complex of who's pulling which side of your heel bone, and like if that calf is working so much, then that's pulling on the top part of your heel bone that can contribute to pain there. So those are the options for pushing, really, is you're either pushing with glute max or your hamstrings or your calves. And if you're not pushing a ton, then you can pull from the front. So you can use your hip flexors to pull your knee forward to get your body to pass over your foot. And then you'll end up with tight hip flexors. And then glute medius is more responsible. So glute max is functioning more on the forward and back aspect of it, whereas glute medius is functioning more on the side to side aspect of it. So if your glute medius is weak, you're going to see things more like an unstable pelvis when you stand on one leg. So like when you're running, you have a period of time where you're only supported by one leg. And if your pelvis is dropping from one side to the other, then it can contribute to hip pain. It can contribute to groin pain, to SI issues, et cetera, that sort of thing. And then like I kind of said in the beginning, glute minimus, like it does similar things to glute medius, but it just isn't as big of a factor. Like it does a little bit of internal rotation. So it rotates your femur inward relative to your pelvis, but it helps move your knee out away from midline a little bit. We don't see as many people whose issue is a weak glute minimus because medius is doing such a similar job. You're going to get one by training the other one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is so. This is all enlightening to me.
Oh, good.
I love the different roles that they play, because you just always kind of think, oh, glutes. You don't really think about the role that it's playing. And then also, I think there's probably a little ding, ding, ding from a few people who are listening that are like, I have chronically tight hamstrings, or my calves feel overworked, or my hip flexors are just achy, and I feel like I always sore and tight. So there's probably a lot of ding, ding, ding going on here. So that's one of the ways we can know that they're not firing, right? As if they're.
So if your glutes aren't firing well, you're compensating somehow because it's a huge muscle and we need it to work. So if it's not, somebody else, and probably multiple somebody else, and by somebody else, I mean muscles, are picking up the slack, right? If I'm referring to your glutes, I'm talking about glute max specifically. I've just left off the max for simplification. If I personally am talking about glute medius, I'll say glute med just to specify that we're not referring to glute max. But glute med, I mean, it's definitely significant, but a weak glute medius it's going to affect you, but it doesn't seem to have as like far reaching, as many downstream effects as a weak glute max. I think just because it's not as big of a muscle, it's a part of stabilizing your pelvis and it has an important role, but it is not as large of a powerhouse, so it doesn't have quite as much potential. Mm-hmm. So you were saying like how do we know when it's not firing? So I really think that the biggest thing to help you know if you're using glute max is not to do it at first when you're running, but to do it when you're standing still. Like most of us can squeeze our cheeks. And so again, like right now I'm talking about glute max specifically. There's an actual test for glute medius, but glute max specifically, if you squeeze your cheeks, you should be able to put your hand on your bum. And when you squeeze, you should feel your bum like fill out into your hand, right? That's glute max. Okay. And so you have to first have the connection between your brain and that muscle and what that feels like to know if that's happening. And then like when you run, like so many things are happening so quickly, that's not going to be the best place for you to understand your glute max. Like if you think this isn't working for you, you got to first connect your brain to your muscle and then do it in a slower, more controlled environment, like doing, any number of glute exercises, squats, deadlifts, hip thrusts, bridges, what have you, or even like something in hands and knees, and putting your hand on your bum, or, getting your partner's hand, depending on what your own hands are busy doing. Put your partner's hand on your bum so that somebody can give you the feedback of whether or not that is actually the muscle that's doing the job, or whether somebody else is doing it. And then like in a slower, more controlled environment, as you can start to build the awareness of that is not actually my glute max. Even though this is a squat and it's supposed to be a glute max exercise, that is not my glute max doing it, you know? And so then like, it helps. It's not always how everyone does it, but it helps to figure out who you're doing it with instead, you know, so that you can ramp down whoever's compensating and ramp up your glute max, you know. And then once you get to the point where you have a good connection with movement, with whatever exercise is really tuning in for you, then you can carry that over to running. Then whatever positioning or whatever exercise is really helping you make that connection, then you can be thinking about that alignment or that position or that movement when you're running. And it's not so overwhelming as, did I just push off with my glute max or my calf? I have no idea. You know, like you can't think about that while you're running.
Yeah, the work happens before the run, and so much of that neuromuscular connection, like we talk about doing drills a lot and activating and getting in like lunge matrix, for instance, getting the different planes of motion, and that happens before the run so that we can make that connection before we're running. And running seems so simple, but if we aren't firing something, we're going to likely get injured. Have you experienced any of your patients or anyone that you know who will have run without their glutes or with very minimal contribution from their glutes?
Yeah, loads of people. I mean, I am the weirdo driving my car who's like, did you see that gait pattern? You know, and like everybody in the car with me is like, nobody cares. And I'm like, yeah, I do, you know. But yeah, people do it all the time. I mean, that's one of the super cool things about running is it's so accessible. Like all you need is a pair of shoes, or maybe not, you know, and like you just leave your house and you go for a run, you know, but like it's not, there's a lot more involved in it than just going for a run. So it depends on like what your intent is. Like if you're going to repeat this thing over and over again, and you're going to do it on a regular basis, it would really behoove you to do it with good form, because you're way less likely to injure yourself, and you can keep up the, you know, mental and physical health benefits of being able to regularly do that. But, you know, if you're going to just randomly from time to time leave your house, your form might not matter to you as much, you know. But the more you do it, the bigger deal it is. And all the time, I would say that probably more people have weak glutes than don't, just because of our lifestyles. Like muscles work better when they're not too long and when they're not too short. Okay. So if you think about your glute being on the back side of your hip, and most of us sit all day long or a substantial period of the day, then we're keeping those glutes elongated all day long. And when you go to stand up, they're probably not the first thing that kicks on, because they've been hanging out in this super long position. So the more you sit, the less likely you are to have really well firing glutes. And then when you go for a run, unless you have a way of getting those turned back on again, you're probably not taking them with you. You know, they're probably still sleeping, at least to some degree. But yeah.
What's your favorite glute activation exercise?
Ooh. So for me personally, I think that turning them on in my brain really happened for me on hands and knees. It's not an exercise that we typically think of as being like a major glute exercise. But for me personally, it took out a lot of my cheats. Like I wasn't able to compensate with my back in order to get the movement to happen. I wasn't able to compensate with my calf because it just wasn't even part of the, you know, hands and knees position. And so it started to get rid of my cheats and really make me find what my glutes felt like, and really make that connection between my core and my glutes so that they had to work together. And then I was able to progress out of hands and knees and make it a more functional thing. But I think that's another really important point, is just because that worked for me doesn't mean that that's going to work for everybody, because everybody's bodies work so differently. And like, I like to say, like, if you were in a house and it was on fire and you fell and broke your femur, you would not walk out of the house, right? But you would find a way to get out of that house because it's on fire, you know? And like, that's the beautiful thing about the human body, is there's so much redundancy built in that you can still get out of the house even with a broken leg. If you have to, you can do it, you know? And so like going for a run isn't quite as dire, but that like redundancy existing is still there. And so our bodies will just, well, I don't have to do it that way. I can do it this other way, you know? And so there's so much individuality in that, like based on what your posture is like, what your genetics are, what your lifestyle is, previous injury, like you might compensate entirely differently than I might, and then the next person might. And so the exercise that really works for you might be a more like typical glute exercise that really helps you turn your glutes on, you know. But for me, like I had done glute exercises for years and I had never really had strong glutes. And then for me personally, it was like really making that connection for my glutes and my core that helped me find it with functional activity, you know. But I feel like most of us can squeeze our glutes and know that that's our glutes. And a lot of people hold too much tension in their glutes. So they like to like squeeze them and tuck under. And like, if you kind of tilt your pelvis back and tuck your bum underneath of you, it helps give you stability, and it makes makes it easier for you to hold your body upright. But like we were saying earlier, if that muscle is too short, it's not going to work well either. So if it's always tucked up under you and you're holding it in that shortened position, you don't have a whole lot farther to shorten in order for you to get good function. And so that's like the opposite end of the spectrum from me personally. And like anybody might fit somewhere in between, where like they're just not on the map at all, or they're getting used in a way that is similar to overusing them, but not in a functional way. You know, like they're just, you're holding tension there all the time. And I feel like the best way to know what you're doing is to check in every now and then. Like, you know, every time you, I don't know, pick up your phone or see the color red or something that happens often, be like, what am I doing? You know, and like squeeze and let go. And then you can check in with yourself and start to realize, oh, like my pattern is like, they're just not on the map at all. They're just taking a nap. Or my pattern is I was already holding that. Like I was already holding on for dear life, you know, and when I realize that, then I have to let go. And so it depends on where you're starting from. Like everybody's body is a little bit different. And that's why like individualized care is so important, because you can't just go, oh, you know, like my neighbor, my sister, my mom, or my brother, like does this thing, so I got to go and do that thing. That might not be the thing for you, you know?
Mm-hmm. Oh, and that's so true. And I love that you said, like, you're going to find a way to do it, right? Your body is going to find a way to do that. Your compensation with different muscles is going to be different. And for us to get an idea of what's going on, we need to go to a professional, see someone who can do the strength tests and can watch our gait. Like you're saying, you're looking out the window, checking out people's form and their gait and how they're using their muscles, to be able to tell us, because we don't see it ourselves. We are in it in the moment. It's our routine. We just do it. It's running. It's part of our daily habit. So getting out of bad habits, though, can take a lot of intentionality, and then also a perspective of a professional who can help give us some direction.
And I would say another good thing about understanding your own body is to record yourself. And most people are like, oh, I don't really want to see myself. And it might not be running, or it might be running. It might be doing some kind of cross training at your house. But like, if you actually see yourself move, it will amaze you how differently it looks on a screen than what you think that you're doing in your head. And there's so much learning to happen there. Like if you're really interested in changing your habits, I can't say enough about how much like watching yourself makes a difference. And I know this, like, I just have learned so much from making videos of myself for social media that I'm like, that was not what I thought it was, you know, and it just really brings awareness to things that you cannot feel from within your own body, you know, and that's what another set of eyes does for you too. So people see you in a different way.
I've done that too, where I've made a video of myself. I'm like, oh no, I'm not going to share that. Don't do that, people. Don't do that. Oh man. So we talked about some of the things that can be overused. What are some injuries that could happen? Not to scare all of you, dear audience. I don't want to scare you, but what are some things that can happen if we're not properly activating our glutes?
It's less about like a traumatic injury, although like weak glutes is statistically related to ACL tears and low back pain. Like research backed hard evidence about those two. But it also, it depends on the person and it depends on how they compensate. But usually what you're going to see is not like a, one instance traumatic event, but like more the chronic nagging long time, issues. Because it's not that you don't know how to contract your glutes. It's not that you're never using them. It's that they're not your preferred pattern. And so you're not getting as much effort from that big muscle group. So you can see, like chronic hamstring tears or that nagging hamstring pain that just won't go away because you're asking it to work all the time, or you can see any number of things as far as people's feet. You can see like Achilles tendonitis, or you can see plantar fasciitis, or you can see even things that like don't quite have a name. Like it's in the bottom of your foot. It's kind of like plantar fasciitis, but it doesn't quite fit the textbook plantar fasciitis. It's usually related to something about those mechanics. The combination, like I like to say that like your foot and your glutes are like the opposite ends of the same stick. Like one of them steering from the top and one of them steering from the bottom. And they're so intricately related, and the knee's caught in the middle. People focus lots of attention on the knee, but it's probably not coming from your knee. Like your knee mechanics are far more basic than your foot and your hip mechanics. There's so much that can happen at your hip and your foot, and your knee is just kind of bending and straightening. It does a little bit more than that, but not a ton, and there's so much more going on at the foot and the hip. But then, like I said before, weak glutes are statistically connected to low back pain. And then, obviously you could have hip pain depending on how you compensate. If you're somebody who's tucking under a whole lot, you could end up even with like pelvic pain, so it just depends. Lots of different things depending on how you compensate. But usually those sorts of things where it's not one incident, it's like, where is this coming from? It's a longer, more complex situation.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up that visual because it really does help me understand better, with the top and the bottom both being ends, the glutes and the feet, and steering us in the right direction. And for running, we think so much like it's just straightforward, but it's not, because we're doing single leg. And so we have the lateral and we have like so much work that we're doing that we don't even give ourselves credit for.
Yeah. Oh, and I wanted to mention, you had asked me before, like, how do I know if my glutes are weak? And I kind of deviated off on glute max by itself, but glute med, going back to the single leg idea. So glute med helps you stabilize your pelvis when you're standing on one leg. So if you stand on one leg and your pelvis drops on the other side, you can pretty much count on the fact that the standing leg glute med is weak. If you stand on one leg and your pelvis stays level, that's what we want. If you stand on one leg and your pelvis tips toward your standing leg, your glute med is doing too much. So you want it to stay level. That's like an easy glute med test. Glute max is like, I feel like the best test is put your hand on it and see if it's contracting, but it's connected to a lot more different movements. So there's not one movement you can look at for glute max.
Oh, that's good information. Everybody should be doing that right now if you're not in the middle of something. So
stand up.
If you're listening,
stand on one leg.
Let us know how it goes.
Get your mirror out.
You had alluded to, some of the muscles that surround it, because of course it doesn't function in isolation, right? It's the whole kinetic chain. Can you talk us through some of the other muscles surrounding it that we need to make sure we are paying attention to as runners?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. So like the reason I feel like most people have a hard time turning glute max on is because it's pretty much connected to everybody. And so you could be missing your glute max for like 90 zillion different reasons. And you got to figure out, where is it coming from? Who is not helping me turn this on? Because muscles like to work together. They don't work in isolation. And so like if we start at the bottom and work our way up, it could have to do with your foot mechanics, because if your foot is always rolled in, like if you're always pronating, it's going to make it harder for you to turn your glute max on, because you're lengthening your glute max and you're probably making the back of your hip kind of tight, trying to reverse that pronation all the time. If you're supinating, if you're towards the outside of your foot all the time, then you might be somebody who tends to tuck under because you're already a little bit rotated outward. And so you might kind of hold more tension there. And obviously none of these apply to everybody, because as soon as you say always or never, you find the exception. But in a broad sense, right? Let's come up to the top then. So like your lats also connect in like this thoracolumbar fascia and this deep connective tissue across your back, and your lats and your glutes really work together. So like the reciprocal, the one leg does one arm does the opposite of the leg, that pattern that we get with walking and running, that's in large part driven by that thoracolumbar fascia, that connection between your lats and your glutes, that kind of helps you get that rotational movement in your spine when you walk or when you run, any kind of gait pattern. And so turning on your lats can help you to find your glutes, or if you've been compensating and your lats are like helping you too much and they're like knotted up and tight, it can make it harder for you to turn your glutes on. And then if we go down to your pelvis, where like everything connected to that happens, some people have better luck finding their glute max by pushing out. So that's why lots of times we'll put a band around somebody's knees, or lots of times we'll do exercises for your glutes with a band around your knees, because it's helping you push your knees apart. And that outward rotation is part of what glute max does. But other people find better glute activity by squeezing inward, whether they're squeezing like a ball or a yoga block or a pillow or something. And the reason that squeezing inward works, even though it's the opposite motion of what your glute max does, is because it's helping so much of your core to turn on. So like if you think of your pelvis as a bowl, at the bottom of the bowl is your pelvic floor. And your pelvic floor is a group of muscles that we usually reserve for conversations about pregnancy and postpartum. But in reality, everybody has a pelvic floor, whether you've had a baby or not had a baby, whether you're a man, a woman, a child, your dog has a pelvic floor. Okay. And those muscles are a really, really overlooked aspect of your core. So if you think of your core as like your trunk, the trunk of your body, not your abs, but like everything minus your arms and legs and head. Okay. And you imagine it like a Coke can, right? So at the top of your Coke can, you have it's underneath your lungs, but you have your diaphragm, the muscle that drives respiration. Okay. And so you want your diaphragm to move downward as you inhale. And at the same time, your pelvic floor relaxes from the bottom of that Coke can, from the bottom of your pelvis. Okay. And then when you exhale, you want your pelvic floor to lift and contract, which creates upward pressure and pushes the air back out of your lungs. Okay. And when your pelvic floor contracts and lifts up, you want your abs to also narrow. And so all of that combined motion is your core. And the more coordinated your core is, the easier it is to find your glutes. And the more your glutes are on board, the better you're able to coordinate your core. So they like all work together, and your abs are like pulling up from the front of your pelvis as your glutes pull down from the back of your pelvis. So they kind of make a counterbalance of each other. If you don't have good ab strength to pull up from the front, it's kind of like the glutes can't play tug of war by themselves. So there's no one pulling there. They don't have as much to work against. And then just by proximity, because your pelvic floor muscles there in the bottom of your pelvis are so close to where your glute max is, especially the muscles in the back of your pelvic floor, they want to turn on together with your glute max. And so there's like so many different parts of your body that are connected and affected by glute max, that's part of why it makes it so hard to turn your glutes on, because who isn't participating? Like, where is the culprit? But usually it's more than one thing. It's not one muscle group that isn't participating. But all of that working together turns those glutes back on, and the glutes being turned on helps all of that work better also.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I'm learning so much. This is so fun.
Did that make sense? So it's kind of like a lot of moving parts all at the same time. Okay,
yeah. Good. Yeah. And I think it also demonstrates just how important, and we think something is simple that is more complex that we really need to pay attention to, and we often take for granted. And so you have a program that helps with this. Would you talk to us about that?
Sure. So I have an online program that is specifically geared towards postpartum women returning to whatever activity that they want to return to after babies, even if it's just like, carrying your kid, or if it's running, or if it's CrossFit or whatever, to help you connect those dots. So as opposed to you, like, buying an online program where you do workout 1 on day 1 and workout 2 on day 2, it's less like cookie cutter and more like choose your own adventure. So instead of everybody doing the same thing because our bodies are so different, like my online program divides your body up into like 8 modules, and it asks you questions and gives you assessments to do to figure out like what kind of goals do you have, and how is your current function affecting your goals. And so then it helps you direct your effort, because nobody has all the time in the world. And if you do, and you can spend lots of time working out, more power to you. But if you don't, and you have to be super efficient, it helps you really target how to be more efficient, because it's answering your specific questions, like what is your problem, and when we assess these muscle groups, is not working for you, who's not on board, who's not helping you out. And so it's specifically geared towards a postpartum population, but we all have those parts. It's just a matter of your why might be different, like if you haven't had children, or if you're a man, like your pelvic floor and your abs might not have gone through those same changes, but something has changed that is what is creating this issue, whatever that may be for you. So I also offer like an online consultation. And I have a free clarity call if people even just want to ask questions and be like, can you point me in the right direction? Because I don't know where to go from here. So,
Oh, thank you for sharing that. It's such important work. And like you said, we're all so different, and there isn't like one path, because our body's functioning different, from our neighbor, from our friends. So I think that's such important work that you're doing. And the stuff that you've shared with us today, Betsy, is so valuable for us to start understanding how our body works and how to honor our body by having it function the way that it's designed to. So thank you so much, Betsy, for coming on the show
you're welcome.
Today.
My pleasure. I'm very honored to be a part of your show today.
No buts about it. This was an informative episode.
Come on.
I'm sorry.
I wish I would have known.
I didn't write that in the notes to try to sneak in a terrible joke.
I would have deleted it.
Yeah. Well, I loved this quote from Betsy that she had on her Instagram page. Knowing your weakness can help make you better and have faster gains. It's always fun to do what you're good at, but you will see quicker progress when you target your effort in the places where you have the most room for improvement. And maybe you're finding that could be the gluteus maximus, or the gluteus minimus, or the gluteus medius. It's possible for your glutes, or lack thereof, to be contributing to your other pain. So problems such as chronically tight and overworked hamstrings, no matter how much you stretch, chronically tight and overworked calves, no matter how much you stretch, heel pain, plantar fasciitis, Achilles issues. As we mentioned in this episode, all of those problems could be because you haven't connected your glutes properly. I loved how Betsy described the hip and ankle/foot as drivers to set our body in motion in the proper direction, and how important those two areas of our bodies are as runners. So next week, we will be discussing with Betsy this kinetic chain further by discussing how everyone has a pelvic floor, and many of us don't even know what it does for us, and we should not be ignoring it. So we're going to be talking to her next week. Just a little plug there before we get on to the world of running.
And first, before we get into the macro reflection on the Boston Marathon, a quick shout out to the A to Z runners, 11 of you who competed in the race this year. Impressive stuff all around. Certainly, as we all know, getting to the start line is the feat by itself. And then being able to enjoy the experience of, and that's what so many tell us because neither of us have run there, Boston being just an iconic experience for distance running in the world. And so that's very cool. Congratulations. Let's give a quick shout out. First, PR to Bill.
Yeah.
Congrats, Bill, on a PR on what is known to be a more challenging course. And that's especially difficult to do.
Yeah.
So great work there. And then additionally, congrats to all the rest of you who competing so tough and so strong. And we're very proud of all
very
the
proud.
athletes. Jacob, Andrew, Brandon, Nikki, who very, very nearly ran a PR. Nice work, Nikki. Mark, Carl, Mary, Dan, Julie, and Kathy. Congrats.
Congrats. And many of our listeners, many of you ran as well. So congratulations to all of you.
That's it. And if you haven't noticed, just by simple association with AtoZrunning, you have increased your chances of running the Boston Marathon. So take note of that and spread the word.
Let's get to the Boston Marathon results, which were very exciting. This year, there was a stacked field with 11 Boston Marathon champions who returned to the course. In the men's race, let's get started with getting into the details. The men's race was the deepest in Boston history. 10 men came in to the race with best times under 2:06.
That's a good field.
That's a really good field.
That either costs Boston a lot of money or there's layers of things involved here too, with like people, with
sponsors
not racing the last couple years and with fewer opportunities than usual and canceled races. So who knows?
Yeah.
But that's awesome.
Yeah. Very awesome. So taking it out was kind of like deja vu.
There it was. Yeah.
Because last fall, the Boston Marathon for 2021 occurred and CJ Albertson was taking it out of the USA, took it out hard. Took it out very hard.
I don't know, very hard. But
he led it.
Took it out honest.
Which is like pretty, it's got to be pretty hard in that field. And this year he drove the pace even faster in the first half, but he had a lot more company this time. Because last time he kind of was solo for a bit there. But this time he had company. And unfortunately for Albertson, the wheels kind of fell off and he faded further than the last Boston race, but
where he also faded. So maybe the formula isn't quite the
well, he still ran a really good time. That's
this
the thing, guys, is that it's like, okay, but this field, let's look at this field. And even though he faded, it's like it's not really that surprising against some of the best in the entire world and that have lived in this world with like their amazing best being in the top that have ever been seen in the human race. So
and so
he ran 2:10:23.
It's a good time.
Yeah, still a great time.
13th overall. Third American.
Yeah. So there were 15 men still together at Heartbreak Hill, but then what happened, Zach? There was a turn of events.
Well, okay, so I don't know exactly where the hill falls into play with this, but from 35 to 40K, the 5K split in that stretch was mind-boggling. Evans Chebet of Kenya basically decided that's when he was going to win the race, and nobody was going to say anything about it because he ran 13:55 for that 5 kilometers.
Yeah.
That's 4:26 per mile.
That's
for
insanity.
3 miles
what
straight.
That is.
And in fact, the word is that his splits were almost perfectly even across those 3 miles, like 4:27:26 for all 3 of them, which just basically means he just said, okay, let's floor it, see if anyone can hang, and then, you got the race in the bag. And he did just that, winning the race in 2:06:51, which is an amazing time for Boston. What was the third fastest?
Third fastest ever in Boston history.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yep.
That wasn't the only super fast split he ran in that 5K because his 25th mile he ran 4:37.
So he was just keeping the heat on still.
He kept
which is
the
just,
heat on.
I don't even, wow.
And this is something that Let's Run said, and I wanted to quote them. Considering Chebet's winning margin, the quality of the field, and his winning time of 2:06:51, this has to go down in history as one of the most impressive Boston Marathon performances of all time. 2:06:51 is the 8th fastest time ever run in Boston.
So not the third fastest.
Oh.
Because we said third somewhere else.
Oh.
So now we're not quite sure. But
maybe it's ever run in Boston, period. I don't know. I honestly don't know. Sorry, guys.
It's also hard, too, because Boston...
2 different sources here.
Yeah, Boston's not a race or records legal course. And so the records around Boston are a little bit less clear.
I think this is the wind thing.
Yeah, so if there's a wind-aided... Because some years they have a wind-aided asterisk.
It's
like
point
when
to
Ryan
point.
Hall ran 2:04 and change. Everyone said... asterisk wind aided because there was a huge tailwind.
I'm pretty sure that's what happened there. Yeah. The first American man was Scott Fauble.
Scotty Fauble.
Who ran dead even half marathon splits in this race.
Well then.
Which is really difficult to do, but also shows you how successful you can be when you run a conservative first half.
Maybe.
Right?
Or he's just that good at hills.
Maybe.
He does train in the mountains.
Yeah. So that was 64:26, 64:26 for a total time of a very impressive 2:08:52.
That's something. All-time top 10 U.S. marathon times, which is great. It's going to have that Boston asterisk, so it's not official in that sense, but still an amazing thing to do on any course.
Absolutely. Second American.
Elkanah Quebec, who ran a personal best, which once again, to do that here, amazing. So ninth place overall, 2:09.07, only 15 seconds behind Scotty Fauble at that. And then rounding out just your top three, at least, Lawrence Chirono of Kenya was in second. And then, by the way, Lawrence Chirono being known as one of the most consistent marathoners on the international stage. He's like first through fifth in any race he runs, period.
Yeah, he has a very impressive resume.
Including fourth in the Olympics, including the not previous, but the 2019 Boston Marathon champ. So he's got all that. And then in third place was Benson Kipruto, also of Kenya. So you got the Kenya three-man sweep.
The sweep. Well, on to the women's race. There's so much more we could have covered in the men's race, but of course, we can't share it all here on the show with time restraints. But the women's race, the women's event was also so very deep with the fastest field in race history. 11 women came in with times under 2:23.
Yep.
That's really fast.
That's pretty good.
The race started off at a modest but obviously super fast pace for most of us to comprehend, pace of 2:27.11. So that was the pace for the first 5 miles.
Which is interesting because usually Boston starts a little quicker than most major marathons because you have a fair bit more downhilling in the beginning.
But to put that in perspective again, that's why I wanted to share that 11 women came in with times under 2:23 because the first 5 miles were in 2:27.11 pace. So that is modest for this group of women. And at that point, of course, it would be quite large. The group was huge. From miles 5 to 16, that was like the fastest part of the whole race. And it dwindled down to a group of about 11 women. And those miles were the fastest in Boston history. And
just in reflection on that, most of the reason why people fall off in that stage of the race is not because they can't handle that pace at that point. It's because they're scared to run that fast at that point.
That's true.
It's a very dangerous strategy if someone was doing it on purpose, because you can burn your legs when you've got the hills coming up and you've got a lot of race left to run. So it's unadvisable in a general sense, but if someone knows they can do that and handle it, they're likely to break people off before the people have actually even been beaten.
Right. Well, if there's a handful of under 2:19
there were
marathoners in the women's
several
field
who could handle it.
Yeah. However, that being said, it was actually more aggressive than even they might want to see, because that section, these ladies were running 2:14.52 marathon pace for that section. That's not including the first 5 miles. But that was like someone laying the hammer down and making that happen. So obviously things were bound to break up at that point, because who can run that, right? So there was a group of 11, and then they ended up splitting into 3 groups. Well, the top 3 ladies that emerged early were Perez Chepchirchir, Ababo Yashana, and she, of course, was the 2020 half marathon world record holder. 1:04.31 is her time. Whoa. And Jocelyn Jipkowski, she's a former world record holder in the half and 10K on the roads. So they have since been beaten, but it just shows you what kind of women we have here.
Perez Chepchirchir has the half marathon women's only record.
And the gold medal for Tokyo.
Well, there's that. But,
there's that.
You were talking about records, so I just wanted to associate.
Throw the records, the fastest times to ever be run in the history of the world. So reigning London champ Jocelyn Jepkowski, she was dropped from contention about mile 23. And in the final mile, Chepchirchir and Yashana exchanged the lead several times. Like, it was back and forth.
In the final mile?
Yeah.
Yikes.
But I did watch this at Endurance Rehab. I was doing my boost, which is like a zero gravity walk. And I was watching it at Endurance Rehab, and it was interesting because I was watching Chepchirchir, and it seemed that she was the one toying.
She was controlling.
Because she's like looking back and like doing these surges, and then like, I don't know. It was a very interesting tactic, but it looked to be on purpose on Chepchirchir's part. So she ended up going with 200 to go, and she went on to win in 2:21.01
by 4 seconds. By 4 seconds. So, like in a situation like that too, that strategy, the reason why a runner does that in most instances, obviously you can't say what everyone's thinking every time they do something. But that strategy is designed to break the will of the other runner. And so you throw the surge, but you don't throw it so long that that it breaks you physically, but you do it to make the other person just give up. And so that's why you do it over and over then as well. Because they're more likely to break up the more times you do it, or give up the more times you do it. And so it's just like that's it. This last mile of a marathon, and she's pulling out the stops on these crazy race strategies is just so hard.
And it was the second fastest winning time in Boston history at 2:21:01.
That is fast on that course.
And Yashana was second in 2:21:05, like Zach said, only 4 seconds behind her. The final mile split was 5:23.
Well then.
Well done. And this was the 5th straight marathon that Gyp Gearchair has won, which is a nice little streak she has going on.
We talked about Lawrence Gerono being very consistent for the men. She has been rock solid for the last 4 years, just nonstop, which is really impressive.
So the 3rd place woman was Mary, how do you say her last name?
Ngugi.
She emerged from the chase pack. So she claimed 3rd place on the podium.
Kind of rose out of the, yep. Excellent. Well, what about the first Americans?
First American was Nell Rojas for the 2nd time. So you can remember that this past fall, she was also the lead American woman, followed by Stephanie Bruce in her final pro year.
And
I was really excited to see that. That was a very strong performance for Stephanie Bruce. And then Des Linden was 3rd on the podium. She, of course, was the 2018 Boston champion.
Des has been a little bit more quiet than other runners in the last year or so. And situations like that, you wonder if maybe was there an injury or something like that. And no, or at least not that we know of, because she showed up strong. So it's good. Now, many were expecting to see Molly Seidel in that mix as well. And for good reason, because she is definitely that good.
And a medalist at the Olympic Games.
Something went wrong, though.
Yeah. She dropped about 30K, it looks like. So
not her day. Maybe she's been dealing with some stuff. Who knows? But that was a bummer.
Yeah. But all around, very exciting day to be watching the Boston Marathon.
Right. And I have to say, one of my favorite things about, the races that do this, where you have the live tracking thing, where you've got the map and you can just put anyone's bib number in and see them on the map and such. I love doing that. So we're tracking our own runners doing that, certainly, and others too. But it gives you a a more real sense of the event, because you see the different things, here's an aid station, or here's this hill section and stuff like that. And that kind of thing is just very fun. So all around experience, the Boston Marathon was a fun one for us.
So from going from a long distance race to the track.
Going to the track, and in interesting circumstances too. Yes, an indoor meet in the middle of April, which really shouldn't happen. Because, there's a main reason why it shouldn't happen, because you can't indoor events don't count for outdoor stuffs.
Yeah.
So even if you were to qualify with an indoor time, it doesn't generally qualify you for outdoor events, things like that.
Right.
Because they're not considered in track. They're more or less different sports.
Right.
You can
but there was
have
a reason
some
for it.
crossover. Yes. Anyway, so I'm setting that up because the reason why this meet happened at all is because New Balance just built an enormous, amazing indoor facility. And this was the opening event for the facility, not just in the sense of hey, now we've got a cool new track, but also because New Balance wanted to put on a show. So they gathered together some superstar women to run an attempt at the DMR relay. That's the distance medley relay. World
record.
Best.
Oh, sorry, best.
It would be a world record because they ran faster than the world record, but the world record is only recognized if it's outdoor for this event. For some reason, they don't recognize an indoor world record. So anyway, world best, we'll call it. But anyway, New Balance has done this in the past. This is not a new thing. As a matter of fact, 2015 and 2017 are both the previous times the world record was attempted, and New Balance did it and set it with their crew. So these women... There are 4 of them because it's a relay, and they run a different distance each. That's why it's the distance medley. And what it is then is you have a 1,200-meter leg, a 400-meter leg, an 800-meter leg, and then a 1,600-meter leg, the classic mile closer. And then these 4, it was an interesting collection. Firstly, because it was clear New Balance was putting its A-listers out, and you'll see why in a moment. But then they also grabbed high school phenom Roisin Willis.
Yep.
which is an interesting
It
play.
was an interesting choice.
So she's the high school record holder in the United States in the 800 meters, ran 2 flat .06 or something this past indoors in 2022. And so clearly, a good choice for a world best record attempt. But
a handful of ladies that are professionals have done that. So it's interesting that they snagged a high schooler.
Yeah.
So I wonder if they're
thought
trying
that
to
was
reach
fun.
the high school crowd. I don't know.
Who knows? But here's what you got. Heather McLean opened the race. Heather McLean is an Olympian, a U.S. champ. She went to World Indoor Champs just recently as well. And she opened up, and they had like the wavelight technology all there. Like they were going to make it, all the classics. Didn't need it because she immediately was ahead of the lights, and they never saw him again.
Yeah.
So that's cool.
Yeah.
But that's just, goes to show how studded this field was.
Mm-hmm.
And then she ran the 1,200 meter leg in something like 3:14. I think they said like she went through, what did she go through? 800 and 2 something. Anyway.
She's a 1,500 meter specialist.
She's a miler. So 1,200 meters is, that's in her wheelhouse. Kendall Ellis took the 400 meter leg in a 52-second rep. And I should tell you there's an interesting backstory there. We're going to get to it in a moment.
Okay.
So that's great. Kendall Ellis, who is an Olympic medalist, U.S. champ, like she's world caliber, one of the best.
Caliber, yeah.
And then Roshan Willis took
the high schooler.
Took the 800 in a 2:03. We could debate whether certainly.
I mean, she's a high schooler.
They could have gained a couple seconds with someone else, but she also could have run a couple seconds faster.
Yeah.
So whatever. But still great, good performance. And she's a high schooler running with professionals.
Yep.
In a world best attempt, so that's cool. And then handing off to Ellie Perrier St. Pierre, whom you should know because you listen to us. She's the world indoor medalist recently. She's the multiple-time U.S. record holder, Olympian in the 1,500. She's just like got it. Yeah. Lately, she's like killing everyone in any event she runs.
Cool.
And so she certainly did not disappoint, running a 4:23 1,600 meter split,
nice.
Which is like a 4:25 mile if you add the extra meters.
Wow.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
And closed it out in a 10:33 overall time, which means very little to most of us because it's a relay time. But what that means is it's a world best. So they nailed it, and actually they buried it. It was significant. So at New Balance's inaugural event on what they call the track, that's literally the name of the facility.
I like it.
But like all caps, track is all caps. The track.
They're taking notes. Who had the meet that was called just like
track meet?
Track meet.
I don't know.
That
sound running. But apparently this is like this new thing where the name of the thing is the thing.
Yeah.
I don't know. Kids these days. But anyway, it was amazing.
Yeah.
Now, you want to know this little interesting backstory.
I do. You baited me.
I baited everyone.
Yes.
So this is what happened because the 400 meter leg was not supposed to be Kendall Ellis. It was supposed to be Sydney McLaughlin.
Okay.
The world record holder, gold medalist in the 400 meter hurdles, right? Who her first Olympics was when she was like 12.
Yeah.
And so
something like that.
And so Sydney McLaughlin was scheduled to run until the day before when she scratched out.
Yikes.
Okay. Day before. So New Balance gets on the phone and they're like, we need to find another person. And true to New Balance's pattern here, it has to be a New Balance person because they're going to do a New Balance thing. Right. Yeah. Well, I guess. Or high schooler.
Or an unsponsored high schooler.
Well, they called up Kendall Ellis. No surprise because she's an Olympic medalist in the 400. She's a U.S. champ. Like she's got it too. But she was in L.A. We're talking the night before the meet. So she jumps on a plane, like drops everything. I don't know what she's got planned for the weekend. Drops everything, gets on a red-eye flight from L.A. to Boston, and then, lands the morning of, later on that night, runs a 52-second and has a world best relay now under her belt.
Wow.
So thank you, Kendall Ellis, for saving the program.
She's the hero.
That is true.
And now the U.S. has that DMR world record. That's great.
World best. But yes.
World best.
So that was really cool.
Yeah, that was super cool.
Now, going across the world
to another long distance
South
event.
Korea.
No, not a track meet.
Fast times at the Seoul Marathon. So you're going to see things like this occasionally. The Seoul Marathon is relatively new, and it certainly is clear that it's a fast course. And so when we start talking about like where people are going to run fast times, Seoul is one that we'll probably start to see and hear more of because times are fast often there. And so as a relatively new event, you can see things like course records happening a little more often, and so that's exactly what did happen for both the women and the men.
So fast.
Joan Chilimo Medley of Romania most recently of Romania. She was Kenyan until just not even 12 months ago. And she won the women's race in a national Romanian record and course record time of 2:18:04.
That's smoking.
Yep.
That's smoking.
That's like the third fastest women's national record now. Kenya is the world record, and then England/UK is Paula Radcliffe's record. This might be the third fastest national record in the world now.
Wow.
So that's good. Nice work, Medley. Won the race
understatement.
handily.
Yeah.
And then on the men's side, Mosenet Geremiu of Ethiopia also set a course record in a 2:04:43.
Okay, that's wow.
Great.
2:04. Yeah.
Yeah, there aren't that many people who have run that fast.
No.
Not many national records that fast either. And so the reason why I bring that up is because back in third place, not far back, as a matter of fact, only 8 seconds back, was Daniel do Nascimento of Brazil.
Wow.
Who, in third place, 8 seconds behind, ran a new Brazilian national record and South American area record of 2:04:51.
Wow, that is an impressive record time.
Yeah, because
That's
there are
fantastic.
only 8 countries in the world with a national record under 2:05.
Wow.
And in case anyone's curious, here's the quiz. What other 7 countries have national
I just
records?
looked, so.
Yeah, you did. Okay, so naturally we know that Kenya does because Kipchoge, and Ethiopia does because 2 seconds behind Kipchoge's record is Bekele. But beyond that, you've got Belgium, Turkey, Bahrain, Japan, and the Netherlands.
Okay.
Those are the only countries in the world
Wow.
where someone has run under 2:05.
Exciting.
So Brazil now joins that elite list. That's cool.
That was a
All right.
speedy marathon there.
Speedy marathon. I look forward to seeing more Seoul Marathon results over the years. It's going to be fun.
It's going to be fun.
Well, there's a lot more
Yeah.
certainly to talk about. But as you know, we can't talk about all of it every time.
Yeah. And I forgot to mention earlier, there are so many great reels that Betsy has made on her Instagram channel, Mama Made Strong. And they are really good for seeing like what the test looks like that she was talking about for your glute medius. It also has the activation exercise that she does. So I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned to you, you can go to AtoZrunning.com and I'll have those embedded, or you could just go to Instagram at Mama Made Strong. I'll be sharing them on our page as well in my stories coming here shortly. So we want you to have that information because our goal here, like I mentioned all the time, is information about the world of running, inspiration, helping you learn more about running and training so that you can thrive as a runner.
And the best place to go to learn that and thrive in that way is AtoZrunning.com and look for the word coaching.
Oh, yeah.
If you need something more than what you currently have. And maybe we can help. And either way, even if that's not the place you want to end up, send us a note because we love the interaction.
Yes.
We love to answer questions, hear your ideas and insights and experiences, and so much more.
At the end of every month, we do a Q&A episode. So if you have questions, we are still receiving questions for this month's episode. We'd love to hear from you about that as well.
Great.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you next week.